The new dungeon Warlords Ruin is finally out, and to my surprise, it's actually a really good dungeon, which is a bit of a shock considering Season of the Wish isn't exactly going to plan, and it seems very lackluster as a season, but the dungeon is magically really good. And this is even with the boss health being higher than what it was in Ghost of the Deep. The mechanics are actually executed a lot better, but I'm getting way ahead of myself by talking about that, so I'm just going to start from the beginning and go through it. Obviously, if you don't want to see spoilers for the dungeon, I'd advise to click off this video and go play the dungeon. But if you have already played it or seen it, then here's what I think about it. So I'm just going to cover the traversal parts all in one to start with, because I feel like it's going to be a lot easier to do it that way. But basically the exploration behind this dungeon map was really good. It was quite nice to walk through the snowy mountains, and me and a friend actually got really confused, and it took us a good 5 to 10 minutes to actually find the entrance to the keep. So yeah, go figure with that one. That's not even talking about the maze, but again, going through the motions, we're going to talk about the first boss next, which was quite a surprise. I like the mechanics on how you actually fight this boss. So just to give you a run through, you basically have to wait for him to throw you up into cages, which slowly ascends to spikes. And the only way to get out of these cages is to shoot 3 taken eyes, which is going to be the running theme of the dungeon. And when you shot these 3 taken eyes, the gates open on your cage, and then you just pretty much jump out and run around. But you do have to do something else. There are little totems that appear with small rings around them, and you just basically have to stand in the zone for them to be captured. These take 7 seconds roughly each time, and when you actually do that, you can basically go into a damage phase. Obviously, depending on how many you capture will determine how long the damage phase is going to be, but normally you're going to be looking for at least one. But the good thing about it, it never felt boring, which is ideal for a dungeon. After you finally beat the boss, you basically get sent to jail, which was a bit of a surprise when we first experienced this. I really enjoyed the aesthetic of the dungeons, but the weirdest thing happened when we were in this dungeon the first time round, because we actually managed to guess the combination completely by luck. What about the direction to the switch?
What's the direction to the switch?
Right, the switch is literally right there. So if we have them spinning all towards it, let's see if it works. Hey, there we go. Okay.
Legendary, okay.
We later found out that is not the case. There is a way to figure it out, which is little markings on the floor of the cells, and you just work out which are going anti-clockwise and which are going clockwise. The maze itself was really fun to navigate through, especially blind. If you have watched a guide and you pretty much just know where to go with the maze, you've just pretty much ruined an experience. Because some of the funniest bits of this dungeon was actually in the maze, where the spike traps activate. Remember, we can go back, because there's a hole in the floor back there. Okay, there's traps.
Have you seen this?
What?
Look.
Oh. Okay. I think the spikes killed us 4 or 5 times each on our first run through, which means they're very effective when you're running through blind. But after that, you have to do a mad sprint, and the boss appears to shoot void orbs, which become very irritating very quickly, and you have to fight through waves of ads as well. Or you could do the alternative and just run past everything, because for some reason that works. But finally you get to arguably the coolest area for me, which is the little castle top where you're actually fighting on the ramparts. And that's really weird to say, because this boss I am actually not that much of a fan of. So it's basically a taken ogre, and the whole mechanic of this raid is what you learned in the previous one, where you're activating the totems again in order to go for DPS, but instead of it actually giving you DPS this time, it's going to spawn these fire spheres. And because it's Destiny 2, that means you have to take these spheres and dunk them into other areas. But the one thing that we got really confused by to start with was a little divvy buff that comes along. But this little buff, if you let it go to ×10, it just makes you freeze to death, so there's no way escaping that. And it took us a little bit to figure this out, because we didn't expect a small lantern on the side of a castle was going to be enough to keep us warm. Yes, literally there are 5 little lanterns on the edge of the castle. Standing in any of their zones basically keeps you warm through the storm. When you set fire to all 4 pillars, then you can go into actual DPS, but in order to do DPS you have to stand in the zone of the fires. And in typical recent Bungie fashion, I suppose, the boss can walk around and he will walk up right up to you. The fortunate side of this, it doesn't appear that he can break wells, so go crazy with the wells. After a very long arduous battle, you will eventually kill him, and yeah, well done, that's second boss dead. And then you move on to another traversal area, which some people are calling Maze 2, even though it's not really a maze, it's pretty much a very linear pathway. And I'm going to be honest, I like all of it, except for one bit. The taken orb that's in the middle of the bloody cave. I don't know why Bungie made this, it winds me up that we had to do this. If it's a hunter or a titan you're playing as, you will be absolutely fine. If you're a warlock, good luck. Because not only do you have to land on very small platforms, you also have to avoid spinning rocks that come very, very fast at you. And they don't seem to come in at a straight line either, they seem to be coming in diagonally, so it's even more complicated to predict where they're going. And did I mention if you die in this area, you get taken all the way back to where the second boss is? Yeah, it's a lot of progress wasted. I mean, come on Bungie, just be nice to us this once and let us just have a respawn timer and that's it. But anyway, moving on. Everything else, good. I love the aesthetics of the entire map so far. But this leads us on to the last boss, which I think Bungie has done a really good job with. But the thing with this boss is I'm not sure how I feel about its health, because after we actually managed to beat it, we figured out we were doing around 13.5 million damage. But compared to the Ghost of the Deep boss, it actually has more health, which is the strange thing about this because it doesn't feel like it does. And I think that's pretty much down to the mechanics. See, in this encounter, you actually have very small gates to beat the boss with. The best way to think about it is you get 3 stages where you have to do a small amount of damage for it to progress to the next stage. After you've done these 3 stages, you go into a proper DPS phase where you can just do unlimited amounts of damage to the boss up until a certain amount of time, or i.e. 3 plates are exhausted. But that's just me simplifying the entire encounter. So to go into more detail, you're doing pretty much what you did in the previous encounter where you're capturing the totems again, and this time the totems directly correlate to how much time you're going to have for DPS. But on top of this, you are going to have a second thing to do, because there is going to be a corrupt debuff that gets put on you, and what you have to do is melee a Scorn Berserker that's coming right at you. Then you basically have to run for your life, because it will try its absolute best to try and give you the debuff back. And if you have this debuff when the timer hits 0, you instantly die. So yeah, that was fun to figure out. It was even more confusing because we had a Titan on our team and he was getting rid of the debuff every single time, but we couldn't figure out why. You'd imagine we would have thought punching might have been the first solution because that's literally all Titans seem to do. But a major warning for this area, the ads are absolutely relentless. Personally, I think Necrochasm just absolutely destroys everything. So if you want to kill all the ads very quickly, then Necrochasm is going to be one of your best bets. Either that or something that does a lot of AoE damage or just a lot of explosions. It tends to work the same way. But after playing tag for a seemingly endless amount of time, you will get into a final stand kind of situation. And what I mean by that is it's not really a final stand. It is set up like one, but it's just not one. And it's really weird to me why Bungie has actually done this, because if you have a limited time on a last stand encounter, it kind of makes the entire thing pointless. So surely this would benefit with having an actual timer to do all the damage in. I know obviously doing the encounter up until this point would be an absolute nightmare and it takes a long time, but the point of a last stand is for you to deal enough DPS under pressure in order to clear the encounter. That's why last stands are so satisfying to do within raids, because whether you're doing contest mode or you're doing the raid for the very first time, when you manage just to get enough damage to get you over the finish line, it is so satisfying to feel. But basically you kill the boss and then you finish the dungeon and then everything's good. Or so you think. Yeah, Bungie's actually made a quest for this dungeon where you're going to have to run it at least 4 times, so if you're interested in doing the quest, good luck. Now, in all seriousness, it's actually quite cool that Bungie's added this in for replayability, because normally when the dungeons came out in the past, it would just pretty much do it once on day 1, leave it alone after that, and then maybe run it a few times a week to get all the weapons and all the armor. Whereas this time around, we've run it 3 times in 24 hours, so yeah, it's quite addictive. All I'm going to say is if Bungie is going to be doing more dungeons in the future, which I hope they are because I love the dungeons of Destiny 2, then they need to be doing these quests more often because they are really good. Sure, it's only a small thing to do extra, but it is so effective in order to get us coming back to the dungeons. But the last thing I wanted to talk about is the armor and weapons. So I am really disappointed with the armor this time round because I'm not a fan of the ice climbing look. I get why they've done it because you're climbing in the mountains, so it makes sense to have some kind of climber gear as an armor set, but honestly it felt like the Ghost of the Deep armor was way superior. But then again, if Bungie actually did get everything right, then I think the internet would break, so I'm going to be thankful that the armor department screwed up. Either that or hell will freeze over. I'm not entirely sure which one would happen first though. As for the weapons, I'm not really interested in the bow because I can't seem to get anything good roll-wise, but my mate did actually get the rocket sidearm. Yes, you heard that right. There is a rocket sidearm, which is the first of its kind. It is a sidearm with special ammo that fires rockets, and according to him, he's hitting 30k per shot, so I imagine this is going to mess up the Crucible a fair bit. I wonder if Argent Ordnance actually has a damage buff for this as well. But anyway, there is also a Strand Sword, and I'm quite fond of this because it has a bit of a weird effect. When you do a heavy attack with a Waveform Sword, I normally expect it to do 1, maybe 2, even 3 hits. The Strand one seems to be consistently hitting 5 times when you launch it, so I'm definitely going to have to test this out a lot more, but I am very curious about the weapon. There is also a Strand Sniper as well, and it does look pretty cool, but I'm curious to see what rolls you can actually get on it before I make any judgments on it. So overall for the gear, the weapon seems really good, but the armor is a big letdown, unfortunately. Overall for the dungeon though, I'm actually very happy with it. It is balanced just right for once, which is surprising to say when it comes to Bungie, because they never seem to get it right. Yes, the bosses have a bit too much health for my liking, but that's a personal thing at this point. The mechanics are made so they can be just easily done, so the big boss health doesn't matter that much. Obviously, if Bungie were to repeat the same mistakes as Ghost of the Deep, then I'd probably have some problems with this. But anyway, let me know what you guys think of this dungeon down below. I would love to hear your opinions, and also leave a like and subscribe. But for now, I shall see you all in the next video.